Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz, and I have something a little bit new for you today. We're going to make one card, but we're going to walk through 5 easy tips for holiday card making. And keep in mind, you don't have to have the supplies that I have. These are tips that hopefully will help you to stretch your supplies, minimize purchases, help you to use some of those specialty items that we hoard until the holidays. And here's my first tip, or the beginning of it. We are making a holiday card, and this is a fireworks stencil. I wanted like a peppermint background. I didn't have any peppermint paper, and so we're going to make peppermint backgrounds out of fireworks. It's going to be super fun. I'm adding it onto this mug-shaped card from Trinity Stamps, and then I also have the cocoa mug add-on, and that will let us turn it into a shaker. So here are my stencils, just like 4 or 5 of them in here, and I'm just looking through to find one where the shape looks right. These layer up, but we're not layering, okay? I'm really only using 2 separate spots on the stencils. Though this is really a pretty expansive stencil set, right? There's at least 9 different firework iterations that layer up. You can do so many things with it. I love that Tanisa, the owner of Trinity Stamps, works really hard to make sure you're going to get supplies that can be used in lots of ways. So I have picked one where there's sort of a burst. All of the little shapes that are cut out of here are the same shape and size. I did one in pink, and then I'm rotating. Start with your darkest ink. It was a little challenging to try to see through the stencil to try to get this second one lined up. I wiped off the pink ink with my rag, and then I just put some white pigment ink on top of that. Okay, so we have spun sugar and unicorn white. And then when I do the next one, I'm going to be using tumbled glass and some unicorn white, and I'm going to do it in the exact same shape. But I really want this to look like it's expanding off the side of the card. Like this isn't just kind of centered with a trio in the middle. That looks a little weird to me. I did put a little bit of mint tape, like Post-it tape, right along the fold of the card because I don't want it to go onto the back. And then I will wipe off the blue ink, rotate again, and add my white ink. I am not heat setting in between. Instead, I'm going to wait until the end and add a little embossing powder with some glitter in it, and I think it's going to be super fun. I've grabbed a different stencil for this third one. It is the same shapes, but a little bit smaller. This one's maybe the easiest to see. It's broken china. It's a little bit darker. I'll wipe the ink off, rotate, and do that again. I make far more cards during the holidays than any other time of year. So all year long, as I'm sort of bringing in supplies, I'm just making a little mental note. Hey, this might be fun for the holidays. Like I think I got this one back in July, and I was like, I could use that for New Year's. I could use that for Christmas. And I had it on my list of New Year's. And that's why I was looking at it and I went, oh my gosh, that's a peppermint. Okay, so it's kind of like looking at it sideways. Tip number 1. I added on some Iciciles embossing powder from Pink and Maine. It is a clear embossing powder with a little bit of glitter in it, and it's going to stick to that ink. Both the oxides and the pigment stay wet a little longer. And then this way, because I did the embossing powder, I know that I'm not going to smear it, right? Sometimes I wonder, have I heat set it long enough? Am I going to end up with problems? But if I just put embossing powder on top, not a worry in the world. Now I'll fold my card in half, and actually I'm going to tape this guy shut. I think it's going to be a little easier to work with as we go to add the shaker front onto here. And that's going to lead us into tip number 2. So I have the front shaker piece cut out of that same blue cardstock, but then this piece I cut out of my kids' craft foam. They have like a little bin of supplies that they're allowed to craft with whenever they want, and I don't have that in my stash. So it's just like fun foam from maybe Michael's. I don't know. It's not very thick. I actually kind of like that it's not very thick. It makes me rein in the embellishments a little bit that I'm going to stick in there. I did put some rip and stick sheet on the back of this. I think especially when you're using fun foam, you need something to help it hold its shape as you're adding it onto your acetate. And I do acetate first because that is the shape of the front of the card. I'm only removing a little bit of that backing paper at a time, And then I can just use my finger to line it up right along the edge. Any double-sided adhesive tape would work for this. This one is Rip and Stick Sheet from Trinity Stamps, but you could use the one from scrapbook.com. I find it great for this application, not maybe for like a heavy-duty interactive pop-up card sort of situation. And I will go along with my finger, and I'm being really careful not to pull or stretch that fun foam. But leaving that backing paper on there minimizes the chance that this will get stretched out of shape, right? You can sort of see it's very wiggly. This looks a little fiddlier than it was. It went pretty quickly. My finger just guides it right along. When I get to the end, I am going to have a little bit of excess foam. And so I would like to tell you that I planned this ahead of time. I just got lucky. Look for a place to end where it's going to be straight. So I'm going to do a little surgery and just cut out that little piece as if this were a foam strip. I just want to make sure that they're touching at the end so nothing's going to leak out. But for me, the fun foam was easier than trying to get a foam strip behind the front of this shaker panel. It is very delicate, like very thin and delicate. And so, whatever works best for you, you certainly could try like a 1/8 inch foam strip. I've seen some of my design team colleagues from Trinity do that. They do fit, but it never works right for me. I always end up with foam sticking out from behind the cardstock. I made another crazy shaker over the summer with the message in a bottle, or the whale in a bottle from Spellbinders. And I used some 5mm foam sheets, right? Much, much thicker than this. I will link to that video below. It has more tips for using craft foam instead of foam strips. Here's tip number 3. I'm going to make my own embellishment mix. And in this case, I have plenty of each of these, but I also in my drawer have dozens and dozens of shaker mixes where there's only a tiny bit left. And so what I have started doing is to collect them together into little groupings where I'm like, oh, hey, all these colors coordinate, or these are with a similar theme, so that maybe I can just mix and match and make my own sort of thing. Here I have, I think it's the Pink Winter Wonderland, the Shimmer Snowflakes, and Winter Sky, all from Trinity Stamps. I picked out some of the larger pieces because this craft foam is not very thick. It's almost like maybe a 1mm foam. And so it's going to be really thin. But the other thing I like about that height of foam is that my family has lots of kids in it. And if they handle this, they aren't going to crush it and just totally destroy the shaker by handling it a little too roughly, right? You can touch the acetate to the back of the card without really damaging the card at all. So as I'm moving right along here, I'm actually on to tip number 4 already, but you're going to see it a couple of times. When I am working with specialty cardstock, craft foam, anything that is non-porous, it can be very difficult to get my glue to stick well, okay? And sometimes it oozes out. So we have a couple of tips really about that. So here's one where I am going to be gluing this pink glitter, like, I don't know, almost like a chocolate sauce, except that mine is pink glitter. And I'm gluing glitter cardstock onto more glitter cardstock. Really tricky sometimes. So I put glue all over the back and I tapped it off on my silicone craft sheet, and then I just let it sit there. What it's doing is that the glue is setting up, it's getting thicker and stickier. It doesn't take very long, but while I let that sit, I am ensuring it's going to stick pretty immediately to the whipped cream topping. I did something sort of similar with the drips, but I don't have to worry as much because it's not as thin. Here, I'm lining this up just at the very top of that whipped cream, and then I don't really care quite where they land. It's going to overhang the bottom in some spots, but I'll trim that off with some scissors. But you can see that each of those little tendrils is really good and stuck on that whipped cream. That wouldn't have happened with Barely Art glue if I hadn't let it set up for a minute. A lot of times I will grab Nuvo Deluxe adhesive instead of Barely Art when I'm working with non-porous materials, but that's so thin. I needed the Barely Art tip on there. I know Nuvo has a fine tip, but I can't get mine to unclog. So that's probably user error. If you have tips there, I think I've been begging for that for a couple months. I want to know about them. I made a little mistake here. It was easier, or would have been easier, to put the whipped cream on first and the drip second because I want it to tuck ever so slightly behind there. I just used my pokey tool to pick that up a little bit. For my sentiment, I'm using the Simply Sentimental Happy. Trinity Stamps has tons that are like this. If you like emergency cards and emergency sentiments, these are along the same sort of line. There's lots of like mix and match and get a lot of use out of it. So I am stamping the word holidays, and I'll use my emergency card essential dies to cut that out. I have a 1/4 inch strip in 2 sizes, and then I'm going to cut that 3/8 inch strip out of a darker blue cardstock. I'm going to cut the happy with my word dies. What I like about these Simply Sentimental sets is that the word dies will cut the word in the shadow, but they will also cut the stamped sentiment, just the happy in all its different fonts, because they're the exact same sizes, the exact same fonts, and it's really, really clever, and you can get it in tons of different words. So I have trimmed down my holidays. I'll layer that on top of the darker blue cardstock. I just add some glue and put it so I have the same margin on the top and bottom and left, and then I'll trim little slivers off of the right until it matches, right? I'm not worried about measuring. I'm not trying to like do any fancy math. Most days my brain can't handle that. So this is how I do it. That happy is very, very thin and dainty. And I have some shimmer vellum and then my happy word, and I put that same double-sided adhesive sheet behind the word happy. This is coming right back to how do we adhere things on non-porous surfaces or slick surfaces. Double-sided adhesive is great, but we have to be really honest with ourselves. They are not all created equal, but pretty much all of them will work really well just for adhering a sentiment onto another sentiment shadow, right? It's not a huge deal here that it may not be the strongest in the world. I have double-sided adhesive from at least 7 different companies, and for this application, just use the cheapest one. Okay, but I'm adding tiny little dots of glue all over the back. It's vellum. The glue will show through. So just behind where that cardstock is, and it looked really fast. I set it down and then you see me pick it right back up, but actually I walked away from it for almost 2 minutes before I picked it back up to set it on my card. So I knew not only would it stick to the acetate, right, sort of a non-porous surface, but also it's not going to ooze. After about 2 minutes, those tiny dots of glue are practically solid, and that works really, really well here. I'm going to add on some sparkles. These are from Emergency Card Essentials die set number 2, and I have just added a little bit of that double-sided rip and stick sheet behind them. I like to put them on the end of my pokey tool. I just stick them on there, right? They're little stickers, and then I can audition them and figure out where I want them to go. My last tip on this piece is don't press them down super hard right away. I am just lightly touching that adhesive to the acetate. And then when I'm sure that I like where they all are, then I kind of press down and make sure that they're really well adhered. If you didn't want to use double-sided adhesive on the backs of these, I would just use the same glue tricks that we've been using to let that glue set up a little bit. If you have them upside down with glue on them, you can actually stick them on the end of your pokey tool the exact same way as you sort of set them onto the acetate. It's just that if you move them, you'll see where that glue was. So the front of our card is finished, but we're going to add a couple pieces to the inside. This comes with the base die set, the mug card die set, and it is a gift card holder. So I'm adding glue all over the back of it, except where those little half moons are. Those are the little tabs that are going to hold your gift card in place. And I'm going to glue this straight onto my card. I like to have a lot of adhesive on the back just so that that doesn't accidentally come flying off the card. And then we're going to add an emergency sentiment. You know, I could add a tip in here. I kind of wanted to. That's like, put your sentiments on with removable adhesive. But if you're not new here, you know that. So we're going to do that. I cut out Fa La 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 Latte which comes with Emergency Card Essentials die set number 2. There's a QR code on the back. You scan the QR code. It'll take you where you need to go. And then I used Emergency Card Essentials number 1 to cut that out, and a circle that's just a little bit bigger. It's our standard sort of emergency sentiment size and mat. Tip number 5 is also a couple of tips. So I am going to toner foil my sentiment. I've been doing a lot of this in videos lately, and so I wanted to give you a few extra tips. So I have toner foil, which is not the same as glimmer foil, okay? Toner foil is deco foil. It is fancy foils from Gina K. It is the Pink and Main Cheerfoils. And I am dusting off both the foil and the sentiment. I printed that sentiment with a laser printer. That's really, really important. Inkjet will not work here. I'm heating up my mini Minc to level 4. I'm very comfortable with mine. I foil a lot, but if you're not, let it heat up for an extra minute or so to make sure it's really at the heat level that you want. I like to use a heavyweight card base instead of the transfer sheet that comes with it because it holds in that heat a little bit better. I do find I need a higher level of heat with a card base as my carrier as opposed to like the carrier that it came with. I am going to add this to my card, but then I'm going to show you a little bit more like bonus stuff with foiling kind of at the end here. So I glued that onto my circle. I don't usually do that. Normally I would glue the circle and then add the sentiment with removable adhesive, but I wanted to be able to move where the sentiment is just in case I needed more room to write some holiday cards. I just have a little bit more to say. I'm going to slide the gift card, or in this case, just a hotel key, underneath my 2 half moon circles, and I just use the pokey end of my pickup stick from Trinity Stamps to lift those and then slide that right on in there. And our card is complete. So I'm going to show you the card and then I'll show you a little bit more on tip number 5. I've got these little shaker bits. They move beautifully. I open it up. I have all this texture and a gift card and the sparkle and shine, like all the things. Hello, holidays. I love that we're sparkly and shiny. Okay, throw nothing away. I accidentally printed essentially an entire page of toner. I thought I was printing white text on black strip sentiments, and that didn't work. So I have this piece that I saved, and I'm going to sweep it off, get rid of any dust. If there's any dust between the foil and the toner, it's not going to stick. Then I'm going to run it through my mini Minc. You could use the Gina K Fuse. You could use a laminator. You could try. Some of them work better than others. Let it preheat for at least 20 minutes. And then when I run that through, I wasn't sure if this would work. I want to make sure it's cool, like really cool, before I peel this back. The toner is like little pieces of plastic melting, and I want them to harden back up before I peel this. And I'm going to peel very slowly. I have this sped up a little bit, but like I looked carefully. If that hadn't adhered the way I wanted, I would have run it back through. If you're going to rerun it, run it at the same heat level the first time. If that doesn't work, increase the heat and try again. My friends, I hope these tips are helpful for you. If you liked this style of video, let me know in the comments below. I can do more like this. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I will see you next time.